I'm Michael Wheeler. I'm one of the other co-curators, and then our third co-curator, Marcel Stewart, can't be here because he's in tech for a show tonight, which I will talk about briefly. This evening, when we open the festival, we're really grateful to have an Indigenous elder, Kate Brandt, open the festival there. But while we're here on these lands, just acknowledge before we begin the startup that Kingston/Cataraqui is on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Anishinaabe people. And of course, Kingston is covered by Treaty 57 and is covered under it was acquired in 1783 as part of Crawford's purchases.
And you might notice a large array of devices and technology in the center of the room. And so it's also important for us to acknowledge the impact of the digital activities that make FOLDA possible, and to consider the legacies of colonization and white supremacy that are embedded inside of these technologies and structures and ways of thinking that we use every single day. I know I've got mine in my pocket right now. So all of this equipment and high-speed internet that is central to what we do, these things are not always available in rural and indigenous communities, and they also do have a carbon footprint that is contributing to the changing climate crisis, which also disproportionately affects indigenous peoples worldwide. So I'm not saying this to make us feel bad, but just to remind us that we are using resources, and that as we are using these resources, it's incumbent on us to use them in a good way and to make good use of them.
So what are we doing here? This is the startup, and this year the startup is called Art for Better Times. And so typically, if you've been to the startup before, what it is often hands-on workshops with emerging technologies, which makes a lot of sense given the curatorial focus of the festival. And so we were going about making a startup just like that until about April of this year, where it just started to feel like it didn't make sense this year. That the events, like social, political, cultural events, had pushed us to a place where we were like, I don't know if we'd go to that startup. Or certainly we would have been excited to be standing here introducing it at this moment. And so we basically put that away for next year and said, let's try to do a startup that is about kind of our concerns and like what, just like everyone seems to be talking about, like when we talk to our friends or we talk to our family right now. And so an article that helped crystallize this for us was an article by Astor Taylor and Naomi Klein called End Times Fascism, which tried to kind of articulate what's different about this political moment in terms of like the rise of these movements. I'm not going to even say names of people, we all know what's going on here. But what really drove us to that particular article was actually just like a small phrase within it, which was Art for Better Times, and where we got the name for this, and this proposal within this writing that a role of art and artists in these times is to propose alternatives, to propose different ways of engaging than the ones that are being pushed on us by certain nation states, by proposing alternatives, by showing like how people can just listen and be kind to one another. And so that's kind of how we arrived here. We put the old startup away and we tried to just come here for a couple of days and talk to people together and, trying to imagine a future that is not just for like a few billionaires on Mars.
So what we're hoping to get out of this is to build community and to build collective action, or build at least the potential for that. That we understand that our futures together in this room, but in all the communities that we go back to, are going to be contingent on our abilities to listen, to disagree, to hold discomfort and conflict between us while still seeking out the solutions or answers to problems that can contribute to a sustainable future, and sustainable in a really broad sense. So we are having, over the first 2 days of the startup, we'll be having 4 conversations, and the first one is today. Those conversations are the Canadian context, and that's where we will start today. Just where are we and what are we thinking about? Tomorrow morning we'll start with the American context, where we will have some guests here in person, but we'll also have conversation starters who will be joining us via Zoom, which is something that will happen throughout the week. Later in the day, we will talk about the international context, the role of Canadian artists inside of an international scene, and also what it means to host international artists here in this country. And then we'll complete tomorrow with a conversation about the technological context. What does it mean that we are reliant on these technologies that are sending billionaires to Mars, and also exploiting so many people and resources on the planet?
So, just want to talk a little bit about what is this? What are these circles, and like how is this work, and what are the mechanics of what we'll be up to for the next 2 days? So, this format is called a breathing circle format. It's a format that we used in collaboration with HowlRound, actually at a startup that we did in 2019. Shout out HowlRound, who's also live streaming this. Thanks, guys. And so what we call the two circles is we often refer to the inner circle as the talking circle and the outer circle as the listening circle. Although we were talking.
I said not to use inner circle. But
I didn't say inner circle.
You did.
Talking? Oh, I called the inner circle. Anyways, I blew it. This is the talking circle. This is the listening circle. Just if we want some vocabulary to talk about circles. Within the talking circle, that we have recruited folks that we think will be great conversation starters, which is the language we've used for those folks. And so for the first half of these conversations, our conversation starters will begin the discussion. At about halfway through, when it makes sense, we will then add 2 more chairs, and the rules of the game change a little bit. Anyone who would like to come from the listening circle to the talking circle can join. Anyone who's tired of being in the talking circle and wants to just be in the listening circle can also bail. The moderator, who for this discussion will be me, will remain the whole time. And then when we move into that secondary way of being with one another, we suspect that the moderator will have a bigger role. I'll be able to take down, like, if an order of speakers, if it gets a bit more complicated in terms of who needs to go next. And I'll try to do that silently, just by possibly like noting with a nod that I've taken that you're next, and with a pen, just for clean audio. And is there anything else? Yes, there are a couple more things I wanted to note. Just to encourage folks in this mode of discussion, it's helpful if you try to make one point at a time. If you make 2 or 3 points, then it's hard for the next person then to kind of relate those, and we all want to be able to talk to each other specifically about the things that we're talking about. When we get to that second mode of talking, where people are coming and going, it would be great if you could begin by saying, "Hi, I'm Michael," or "Hi, it's Michael," or "I'm Michael." Whatever example you want to use, just to introduce your first name before you begin talking. And I wanted to talk about M. M is over there. Hi, M.
Hi.
M is our graphic recorder. M is a PhD student here at Queen's University. M is also an artist. M also took some cool arts leadership classes that I ran. So M is well situated to make artistic representations of the conversations that we're having in this room. So those will grow over the 4 conversations. And then what will be super awesome is on day 3, for the folks that are in day 3 at Ingenuity Labs, when we're trying to have our working sessions about like, what should we do about all the stuff we just talked about, then we will have those recordings to kind of look at and kind of refer back to. So that's what M's doing over there. And also just like a fun thing to look at when you want something to look at.
I should probably explain Andy. Andy, you'll see here, is tethered to our central owl. So this technology in the room is present so that we can live stream this conversation. And Andy is here monitoring the owl and the feed from this position. And thank you for doing that, Andy. We're really grateful to Connected Minds, which is is supporting the startup through this technology, giving us equipment, helping us to pay for equipment to bring the live stream out. But it is a live stream, so do be aware that if you enter into the talking circle, you will be live streamed. And that will be a thing that happens. Except for tomorrow. Tomorrow morning when we're talking to our colleagues from the United States, that will not be live streamed. And I think I heard a aha, and so I think it's fairly evident that our colleagues are under threat, and so we are doing that to protect them and to protect the conversation, so the conversation can proceed with some trust and candor. I wanted to say that you'll notice by the door there's an access table. So those are comfort items or materials that are there for you if you have need for them. So you'll see period products, you'll see tissues, hand sanitizer, pillows, blankets, snacks, apple juice. This is a relaxed and open environment, so if you feel like you need to stand up, to move around, to move your body, as I've been taught, when you take care of yourself, you're taking care of the group. And so we invite you to take care of yourselves. And I also want to mention some of the cameras that are outside of the listening circle. You'll see Shabnam, you'll see Adam. These two artists are filmmakers in residence here who are creating a documentary about FOLDA, and so they are also here in this room, in this conversation.
There's a lot of cameras in here.
I know there's a lot of conversations. Oh, I forgot one thing though. So for the second half of the startup, but like after on Friday afternoon and Saturday, we're really following the principles of emergent strategy. So we're trying to be open to where the energy in these conversations is going to emerge, and to we've provided space to be able to attend to those questions, attend to those conversations. So after the laser talks on Friday, there's kind of like breakout sessions, workshop time, and that just means we have a chunk of time where we get to talk about what has come out of this kind of research time of the first 2 days. And then on Saturday, we'll all come together again in the morning to debrief and to see where we are after having traveled through all of this together.
Great. Of course, I just want to mention, we're at a festival. There's also art going on at this festival. So what's going on at this festival today? Today, Windrush opens at the Broom Factory. Broom Factory is in East Kingston, for those of you who are from Kingston, and so it will take you a little bit of time to travel there, depending on the mode of transport that you're going to take there. If you have any questions about how to get Broom Factory, anybody in a FOLDA shirt can help you out with your many options about how to get there. In terms of when to go to the Broom Factory, from 7 to 8, we're having a community gathering that will have food at it, and roadies and doubles and good vibes, and leading right into a performance at 8 o'clock. And the artists have been very clear, they want there to be good vibes leading into the performance. So just to say, that's kind of like what we're up to at the Broom Factory. Also, if you're not from Kingston, Broom Factory is super cool. It's the coolest thing we probably have in Kingston for indie artists and like bands that come through. And so a good time will be had there. Hopefully everyone can join us for the opening tonight. We're looking forward to it.
Yes, and lastly, I would like to just offer some gratitude. I want to offer gratitude to our team, Margaret Evans, Seymour Irons. I don't know everybody's last name, but Jamil, Rose, Sophia, Madeline, thank you so much for all of your work to support this festival coming. There's tons of people who are not in this room who have supported where we are. And of course, our resources, our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, the City of Kingston Arts Fund, as well as Experience Ontario, and this CAPF, which is the Canadian Arts Presenters Fund for Canadian Heritage. So these are your tax dollars at work. Like, that's what's happening here. This is how we're using your tax dollars, is to have these important conversations.
And the Dance School of Drama and Music, and the Department of Film and Media.
And Ingenuity Labs.
And Ingenuity Labs. And the Agnes Everton. Okay, great. Shall we start?
Let's do it.
Okay. So I'm going to step in here. If you're a conversation starter for the first conversation, please come join me.
Is it musical chairs where we walk around?
We can just pick a chair here. Hi, Corey.
Sarah and Brett, would you like a little cup of water?
Oh, I have a bottle, but thank you so much.
Would you like a cup of water?
So before we get started, I'm just going to ask everyone to we'll briefly go around and introduce ourselves. If you're curious about people's bios, they have real bios on our website, so we only have to do the abridged version so we can jump into the conversation. And Corey, I know that from your feed, it's hard to understand like where people are in time and space. So just to say, you go after Sarah Kitz.
Oh, me first. Hi, my name is Sarah Kitz. I use she, they pronouns. I'm originally from Toronto, born and bred. I'm now living in what's colonially known as Ottawa, on the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. I'm the artistic director of GCTC, or Great Canadian Theatre Company, and I am the vice president of PACT, which is the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres. I'm very happy to be here.
Ani, Corey Dishnikas. My name is Corey. I'm a member of the Matagami First Nations in Northern Ontario, also French, Canadian, and Irish. I live on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations in East Van. And I'm very grateful to call these territories home, and I acknowledge the elders, both past and future, for their stewardship of these beautiful lands. I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, I'm a director, composer, I write musicals. And I'm also the artistic director of Urban Ink Productions here in Vancouver, that's an Indigenous and culturally diverse performing arts company, and Raven Theatre, a new creation company. And I'm the understudy for today, so I'm an understudy here for Lisa Ravensbergen. So she wasn't able to join, and here I am.
Yay.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you. I'm Brett Christopher. I am the managing artistic director of Thousand Playhouse, which is about 25 minutes to the east in Gananoque, Ontario, a town of 5,000 people. I have lived in Kingston for 17 years after having grown up in Toronto. And I lived here with my wife and my 2 children. Yeah.
I'm SGS, or Sarah Garton Stanley. I have lived in lots of places and been in many today. So right now I'd just like to say that I'm originally from Montreal, and my partner and I just got a little place in Toronto, but we're making the most of our time in southwest Nova Scotia, Mi'kma'ki territory, beautiful Birchdale Lake, which is an off-grid hunting and fishing lodge, and we also have a place in Yarmouth, the town close by. And I think I'm mainly an art maker, director, dramaturg, and thinker about why we do what we do and how we do what we do.
Great. So we are met. We're here to have a conversation about the Canadian context, which is like a pretty almost problematic like term, just like the start off the top. We think about Canada, who's represented, Canadian, what languages are we speaking even in this conversation. So I just want to acknowledge all of kind of like who is and is not present in this conversation, just to begin. We did meet to have a pre-conversation here, and I think something that came up for all of us was just this understanding or this sense that nationalism is really rising in Canada, and that has many different forms and brought up a lot of different ideas for us. And I just thought about an idea on my bike ride home yesterday. I thought maybe I'd share in this moment because I feel like it a bit crystallizes for me how I feel like things are different, which is previously when I explained to people what the National Arts Centre was, I would say, oh, it's like our Kennedy Centre. And now, if you ask me what the National Arts Centre was, I'd be like, oh, it's our National Arts Centre. Like, I don't want to relate myself as like an American derivative, and I would have been even more comfortable with that even like 6 months ago. And so maybe, Sarah Kitz, to get us started, I'll throw to you, how do you see like this nationalism changing right now?
I'm in Ottawa, and I'm running a company called Great Canadian Theatre Company. So it feels really complicated and top of mind. What I'm thinking about nationalism right now, I do see it on the rise, and it seems in significant quarters in Canada to have a kind of positive spin at this moment with a lot of folks. And as someone who is a newcomer to Ottawa, you know, the convoy was there a few years back. And that's where most of the Canadian flags were. And that charged the symbol of the Canadian flag in a way that it hadn't previously been charged for a lot of people. And the flag is newly charged now with a different flavor of nationalism, and I find myself itchy about all of it, I will say, because I feel, on the one hand, extremely grateful to live where I live in the world, and also nationalism in general makes me itchy. So I think it's kind of fascinating from a dispassionate place to see the charge on the symbol change, but I do have questions about what can be generative in this quote-unquote positive nationalism, because I agree we shouldn't be, or hopefully we don't need to be, understanding ourselves specifically in relationship to this other nation. However, like, to go back to the Massey report, so many of our cultural institutions came to be after this massive report, which told us that we were freighted with American and British influence, and so maybe we could have, you know, SGS can talk expertly about this, but we could have, you know, money funneled into culture as a way for us to understand ourselves, to build a cultural sovereignty, which doesn't seem to be anywhere in the conversation of our new federal government at this moment. But I am thinking a lot, at least as specifically the artistic lead and programmer of a regional theater company in the nation's capital, what it means to grapple with, you know, the history of this land and the idea of Canada at this moment in time. It feels incredibly rich with possibility and incredibly complicated, which I think is great, actually, because I think I would be more alarmed if there was sort of one channel that we were going down, and I think the fact that there's so much to argue about in this moment is kind of charging me up and relieving to me, rather than us deciding what Canada is in one kind of simple way.
I feel like because the Massey Commission came up, we should ask SGS what they want to say.
I mean, well, first of all, you really reminded me of when I was younger, and the Canadian flag was a pin that travelers took to say they weren't American, and to be treated better because they weren't American. And people would be like, "Oh, you're from Canada," and so it was this unexamined passport that changed, I'd say, in the 90s, when sort of our international ideas of peacekeeper really got challenged and questioned, and then when we moved into unearthing our own, you know, really troubled histories. So the whole sort of easy pride of what it was. But I do think that you know, it made me think of an earlier act, and of course prior to that, when the flag came to be in the first place. I don't feel sort of positioned to speak expertly about the Massey report, except to say that it was, as you said, something that was felt to be an important document to help place Canada at the big kids table internationally in a geopolitical way, using culture as a framework with which to do it. And at the time, it understood Canada through a largely Anglophone with a portion of Francophone, and no other cultures really represented within it. And although not a lot of text relates to the Indigenous founding of this land that we call Canada, that which was there was very dismissive and sort of talked about it being over and good for sort of trinkets and stuff. So largely dismissive. But I think what was true then is true now is that we are a land that has come together on not being our neighbors to the south and not being referenced entirely in the British model of sort of political organizing. And what is great about Canada, in my view, and it's John Ralston Saul's argument, and it's a flawed argument, but it's still an exciting argument, that our parliament is founded with a large dose of Métis reasoning and thought, and that the plurality of our system enables exactly what you say you love, which is this potential for a lot of different viewpoints to happen kind of in simultaneity and never in full consensus mode, with then the possibility of having a vibrant cultural tapestry that never fully gets to be blockbustered because you can't, because there's too many little sort of, so that to my mind is maybe the secret, I've said it, for me that's the secret power of Canada as an idea, is that there's 500 plus nations that are sitting together under this kind of heading of Canada, whether it's comfortable or not, that's still true. So I think that's all I can think about to say in this moment. Yeah.
Corey, I wonder if you have anything just to add to this idea of like nationalism in a country of nations. Was something we just briefly emailed about.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation and to hear all of you speak, and especially SGS, to be inside your thought process is beautiful. And it's, I'm happy to be here. I think that Canada as an idea holds multitudes. And I think that, so when we talk about nationalism, I think we can talk about like what we see on the news, which is sort of like almost like a mirroring of American nationalism. But I also think you can be proud of a country that you're from and recognize its true history, and the true history of these lands. And I think what's been really powerful for me is understanding the longer history of Turtle Island, and sitting with different elders who talk about these things going in waves, and that maybe this last wave was just getting to 20% of the people, 20% of the population, but that wave now has a new understanding of the land that they're on. And then the next wave will be 40% of the people will then have a new understanding of the land that they're on. And it sort of works in that way, but you can't deny the truth of this land. You can't deny that it is founded within indigenous cosmology, ideology, that there's a huge richness and history of language and culture that has existed since time immemorial across Turtle Island. And that I think the way to what we see as this nationalist idea is to move away from that and create something new. But I think indigenous people and people who are acknowledging that history can recognize that there is a broader perspective that always is ready for more space and is always ready to reach more people, and that new people are discovering and figuring out that true history every day. So I think the disappointing part is that as this reawakening was happening across the country, I think a lot of us thought that it would go further, and that change would be way more wide-reaching, similar to sort of some of the changes that have happened internationally. Speaking of Aotearoa and the different ways that they've incorporated indigenous teachings and language into their full society. But I also feel like that's where you have to stand strong to those teachings and play that long game, and that this is just a moment in time where we have to grapple with our own our own vulnerability of living next to, a gigantic superpower who has a blind spot that is so enormous about so many things. And that some people think that we're like that, but we know better than that. And so we have to trust in what we know.
Brett, when we had our pre-meeting, you told us about what's going on at Stratford right now, and I feel like maybe we should just kind of share the anthem news.
Yeah, just to speak to, I think Sarah hit it so well. We're talking about this idea of the flag being leveraged by the convoy, and then this kind of pendulum swing back to like, oh yes, we have our flag back. But it's just as oversimplified as an emblem and kind of meaningless. And, I think we discussed the idea that before every performance, they're going to be playing the national anthem at Stratford. And I had, people that work with me that had come back from seeing a performance in previews and had said and they were in their 20s and 30s, and sort of said it's abhorrent. It's ridiculous. Why would they do that? How can you do a land acknowledgement and then 5 seconds later play the national anthem and everyone rises and says thank God we have Canada. And I think our discussion had been is that going to be a one-time thing, or is that going to be I went then weeks later and they played it again, and I was sitting there with my wife who jumped up and was like, we have Canada, and I was like, oh my God. But I stood, so there you go. Yeah.
I mean, just to make you feel better, I did mention briefly, I was like, should we get a Canadian flag for our front porch? And then Zoe was like, what is wrong with you? But but just to say, a lot of us who think poorly of nationalism, I think, have gone down that road, at least mentally, briefly in this period.
I think even people buying groceries, they're now looking for any reason to buy, there's a little maple leaf. It's so simplified down to a little red maple leaf, which is really just nothing, right? This idea that, this was prepared in Canada, which, I think if you dig down means it's an American company that has a couple guys that cross the border and put something into a can and then we're going to buy it. It's not really a Canadian product, but it's just a reason to feel that national fervor. It's so funny because I come to this now after sort of a decade of running this company in GAN as a producer primarily, because I also run the sort of financial and administrative side. And I think for me, I rebranded the company in 2017 as Canada's Dockside Theatre, which was really, as abhorrent as it is to leverage that same kind of very oversimplified version of what we are, which is in our cutoff shorts on the dock in the summertime, basking in this flag and Molson Canadian beers. It's trying to ostensibly sell theater with this very simple version of who we are as a nation. I'm not proud of it, but we sold a lot of tickets.
So, but that's interesting. Sarah, you offered that there's opportunities in this moment. So, open question for all of you. So I think we all share some skepticism about the current moment in nationalism. But does anyone see
I love it. I really do. I love the not the ease, not the darker, but I love the feeling of it. I love being excited about being in Canada. I really do. I find it so inspiring and energizing to think about what's possible, because we're looking to one another as opposed to looking outside of the border. We're looking to our complexity and being like, hey, this is actually we're actually pretty cool. We're rife with all kinds of terrible things that have happened. It's ours to own and to think about and to sometimes to leverage, and other times to really think about how we can work together to transform it. I do think, and in our earlier conversation, of course, it can easily, there can be erasure, there can be a bunch of things that can happen as a result of it. But I have to say, I feel so energized by this idea that we could be good. Even though we know we've got all kinds of moral repair and work to be done, that this could be a really good place. What I don't like is being referred to by anyone. Michael Bublé at the Music Awards said, like, we're the greatest nation. I was like, no, let's be the second greatest. Let's be the third. I don't care. Like, let's get that out of there and let's just be happy to engage with one another and to figure out what this moving idea is, this amorphous moving idea of this land that's not there and not there is. So I'm excited by it, yeah.
I would piggyback on that, and yeah, I think that because there is this new attention on Canada, it does provoke this opportunity to be excited about what's happening here, what's possible, how we might reorganize ourselves, either in a nation-to-nation relationship in a real way, in terms of putting a primacy on the kind of thought and culture that is born on these lands, to bring it back to a theater context, you know, an appetite for Canadian work that is completely born here, Canadian writers, Canadian designers, actors, directors, yada yada. There are a lot of companies that make their bread and butter, and no shame, but they make their bread and butter not doing Canadian work. And I'm curious, no shame. But I am curious to know if in those places, particularly, if there is I'll put quotations around the word new or a renewed appetite among audiences to see work that has no title, I'll say, right, that has no recognition, or that is some kind of Canadian canon work, which we're still building because we, you know, spend tremendous amounts of energy bringing shows to premiere, and then frequently those shows are never seen or heard from again, which is not a way to make a canon of work. So I'm curious to see what will happen in the cultural sector, and for us specifically as theater makers around that. I think there's a lot of opportunity that we, like, my hope is that we can't even see what's possible yet, you know, like we can't see what's there from where we are right now because we're at the beginning of it maybe.
You know, like Kim's Convenience has played a lot, and so is Life After. Those are just two, you know, things that come. Definitely the Donnellys, Thompson's work, Thompson Highway's work. Like I think that it's incorrect to my mind to say that we don't have a canon of work that we're beginning to return to. I think we're still so. And this is where you get into, we're so young as a nation. What does that mean? Is that when the flag? Was that when we, you know, like whatever? But we're still young enough as a group of individuals who wish to participate in a shared storytelling world. And I think it's, you know, I'm also, when an audience goes and sees, let's say, Wayne's production of Streetcar Named Desire, yes, they're seeing an American great play, but they're seeing, in that permutation, they're seeing Soul Pepper directed by this incredible Canadian director doing that work, and I'm not sure they're thinking, oh, we're not getting Canadian content. So I feel like there's a lot of ways in which, and again, I feel like I'm really being a booster here for Canada, but we're doing a lot of things maybe a little bit better than we thought we were, and this is a moment for me anyway to uncover things and go like, oh, actually, you know, when I think about, I mean, George, who started at Great Canadian Theatre Company, really got his start there. I'm blanking on George Walker. Yeah, I mean, he's hitting a tough moment. There's no question. But his work has come around a number of times and likely will come around again. Anyway, you're raising a really great question, but I'm spinning it to the positive for the sake of it.
No, I like that. I think we're just still building the canon.
Yeah.
And I love that example actually of Wayne's Streetcar, because maybe I should say more particularly, I wonder if there will be an appetite in non-theater goers to see what's happening in Canadian theaters. Full stop, right? Because these are the artists who are making work here, whether that work was written here or not. It's made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Corey, I really appreciate the imagery of the wave ideas that you propose, and I just say, like, I really agree that, like, I think we all thought, like, that 20% wave was going to be bigger than a 20% wave. And I wonder if you see in this, like, what would you imagine would contribute to, like, a 40% wave?
What a great question. I think that I think it kind of relates back to potentially what we were just talking about Stratford doing the national anthem. And I haven't seen that happen. And I also wonder about what that experience would be like, you know, for Indigenous people who are in that audience, and sort of, because I know some of the work that they've done to build out those audiences and communities. But I can say that I was at a concert in Vancouver where an artist started playing the national anthem, and the, like, rise up that happened. And I will agree with Sarah, Stanley, about that it was, like, kind of cool to see. Like, it was something where I was like, wow, people are, like, moved by this. But I didn't join in. And, you know, my husband didn't join in. And it felt like a bit of a, wow, we're not in the same place. Or we're not in the same place with this music, with this thing that is supposed to represent us. And so I don't know why I didn't, other than that it felt like it felt wrong in that way to sort of, it almost felt like sports-like we were at a, like, hockey game or something. I was like, I don't do that. But all that to say is that I think that even the questioning and even having that thought of why am I having this response that is so, against this, and to witness other people have this, like, big way, I think it's to feel that, and so it isn't for nothing, you know. It's still a good thing. Did I lose my?
We lost you for about 10 seconds there, so we just lost the last. Oh no! Where are you?
Screen of death.
Oh, there.
Oh, there you are.
Hi.
You're back.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Where did you lose me?
Just like the last 10 seconds of your thought, your thought there.
Oh, I was just going to say that even understanding that feeling within ourselves and why we may have a negative response to that, I think is also a good thing of, like, where we're at now. And that maybe there were more people in the audience who felt that same way, but who felt the need to stand or the need to, like, participate in this, like, show of patriotism. And so, and the additional thing I was going to say is that I also recognize that it's a hard time right now just to sell tickets and to run businesses, and I can see why people would choose to, like, latch on to that, like, national populism right now, just to, like, anything to get people, you know, into a theater. But I think that's where really education and building out those networks of making sure that alternative histories and histories that are from different perspectives are properly taught, understood, so that when you get to situations like that, you can actually hold both at the same time. It isn't asking for us to forget that Canada exists. It's saying it exists and it will keep evolving and keep changing as time goes on.
Just to come back on that's so interesting, Corey, and because I was a lot at Stratford last week, and they didn't play the national anthem for the Robert Lepage production, and they did the national anthem with Mev Beatty as Rachel Lind, kind of leading us into Kat Sandler's interpretation of Anne of Green Gables. So it became kind of a wink and a nudge for those who wanted it to be a wink and a nudge, and everybody in the cast kind of came on and sang by the end of it, and it still brought that feeling, actually, that it was brought when it was played at the opening for their season opener for As You Like It, but it had the it did some bridge building. I felt like it made it possible, if you weren't into it, to not feel you had to be, because it was just some performers who were doing it and then some of the audience who were kind of joining in. So it was kind of interesting to see the trajectory throughout, and interesting that it didn't play for Lepage's show. So I don't know how the decisions get made on these, but, you know, was that part of a sort of a Quebecois reason for that? Was Lepage just like, no? And they were like, okay.
You're Robert Lepage, you do what you want.
Yeah, we'll get you electrical motorcycles.
Exactly,
Yeah.
whatever.
But yeah, anyway, so but it's been a big, you know, it feels like it's such a small thing in a way, like, oh, a national anthem, but it seems so, like at the Stratford Festival, which is, as we know, Shakespeare, colonial, like it's, and as Corey mentioned, like trying to make so many different inroads to different communities, but at its roots, it sits within a very specific landscape, and that they're being so fervently respectful and perhaps trying to sell more tickets through this movement. It does feel like a really important moment for us as theater makers to think about it. And I have to give, like, Kat Sandler's production is phenomenal. It will probably play everywhere, but give her just another set of kudos, because it felt like that decision somehow managed to make it playful. And for us to be part of this moment, to be able to be playful in it, also felt really compelling and interesting. Yeah.
And that's Mev Beatty playing Rachel Lind. So she's
Yes.
playing it as the character Rachel Lind.
Yeah.
Who's kind of
who was part of a book club and kind of nerdy, and then would sing it anyway. You know what I mean? Even like you might not, but she doesn't mind. So yeah, it sort of gives you permission to be in that world with it. Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could switch gears a little bit. We only have 15 minutes of our alone time up here together. And I did want to just touch base a bit about, okay, we're talking about the Canadian context of this moment. And the other thing we haven't mentioned is just like the state of the arts post-COVID that we're all kind of existing. That's like the context that we came into, or that is like this kind of rise in end times fascism has come into. And, you know, I know that SGS and OASE are going to talk a bit later in the startup specifically a bit about this. So without kind of digging into your later material, but
Just give us the early stuff.
it is like, you know, if we hadn't had the election and we had in the States and we were having this conversation, we would probably be sitting here talking about like the fact that like it's way harder to get people to come and see things than it used to be. You might say, I have solved that. I'd like to hear about that. And just like that, there does seem to be like a malaise or a disconnect from the work and audiences, perhaps. And so I wonder how that plays into it, because it is like kind of the context of Canadian theater right now.
Do you want to speak to it
Yeah,
first?
I think so, because I feel like you do things differently at your theater.
I mean, I think we, as an organization, because we're a regional that operates in the summer, probably one of the only ones, if not the only one, we had the luxury of having the low COVID time. You know, COVID was so present in the winter months because everyone would be inside. And so we were the very first company in this country to return indoors in 2021. We all had the very first performance indoors in the country, and have really not looked back. So I do think we have the benefit of the season in which we operate. And, you know, to refer to our previous conversation, I unapologetically returned as fast as humanly possible to a full production model, like the same budget in 2022 as I had in 2019, and then kept growing from there to ensure that people came back as fast as humanly possible to not lose that momentum. But I also recognize that it's, you know, it's we have to provide them with the things that they want in order to ensure that they return. So we've talked about this: Jersey Boys, Mary Poppins, Mamma Mia, like the titles, none of which are Canadian.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure.
What else you got? 9 to 5? I can just keep going. None of them are Canadian.
Yeah.
So, because that's what yanks them in. And then when they come to see Sound of Music, another one, then they go to see Sexual Misconduct of the Middle Classes in the other space, right? That's the trick.
Yeah.
The trick is that you lure them in with this show that they recognize, and then you provide them with something that is Canadian, artistically engaging, challenging, et cetera, et cetera. But we have been, I think, primarily lucky, and then there's been momentum because since 2022, we've hit season, like company record, 50-year records, year over year over year. And then we're exceeding last year's current sales are exceeding last year by about 4%. So it's an anomaly, I acknowledge, in the industry, and I do think it's a result of when we operate and potentially what we program.
Yeah, well, those are two pretty big factors.
Yeah, yeah.
How's it going?
In Ottawa,
Yeah.
at GCTC. We saw almost 50% of our audiences, of our subscribers, I should say, not return from the pandemic. So
Wow.
that wasn't even programmatically related. People just bowed out. So that was obviously devastating to the organization. And there's a huge turnover happening in our audience, and that is a very cool thing because there are people who've been with GCTC for decades who really identify with this organization, and there's an influx of new people as well who are really interested in what we're doing. So we're on the right trajectory. I think it's going to be a long, maybe slow burn, although I'm really encouraged by the numbers that I'm seeing now, which are the best numbers we've had in 4 years already, like this early in the season. So that's a really great thing.
Do you have any sense of what's making it get better?
I think that there's trust that's been built and relationships, and that doesn't happen overnight. We're working really hard to be a space that is relational rather than transactional, and that has to be embedded in everything that we do, and that takes a lot of work and time and energy, and that's good stuff. It doesn't feel burdensome to do it, but it is really intensive, and we have a smaller staff now than we did previously when I first came on. So it's just, I think, a long build back.
Yeah.
But build back different also,
Yeah. It's better than build back better.
Build back better, build back different.
Build back
Build
longer?
back different. Yeah.
Corey, what am I getting wrong about Urban Inc.'s audiences, and are they as good as before the pandemic, or how are your audiences?
Oh, I wish that I had positive things to say. I think it's multiple factors that have impacted not only Urban Inc., but Indigenous and culturally diverse companies across the country. So pre-pandemic, this musical that we were producing and touring for a long time called Children of God had, 3 year of tours lined up at regional theaters across the country. We had, 3 to 4 month tours locked in, like we had casts and everything. When that got canceled from the pandemic, we thought we would be like everyone else, where, okay, well, as soon as we're back, all these presenters across the country will return to us and we'll kind of just like continue on and keep programming those tours. Though a 1-3 month tour reduced to 1 week tour. And every partner, from the largest regional theater you can name in the country to the smallest presenter of a small roadhouse, backed out for multiple years of tours. So we've just completed the last tour that we'll ever do of Children of God, unless something dramatic changes. And the saddest part for me was that when I spoke to artistic directors, many of whom are like my friends and who I've developed relationships with over many years, and so they can speak candidly with me, it wasn't that they didn't think the work was good. It wasn't that they didn't think it was needed in their community. It was that their subscribers would cancel if they presented one more show, what they said, one more Indigenous show in their season. So it was too much of a risk for them. So that's disappointing for us. We move on, create new shows. There's lots that's, coming. But what I wasn't prepared for was how that would be felt by the actors and artists and artisans who work with us, to see us shrink in such a dramatic way and to see those opportunities go from what they were getting offered before, which are 3-month tours, down to 1 week tours or a couple week tours, little runs. That has been really sad to see, and it has created a lot of tension and a lot of sort of disappointment within the Indigenous community who feel that as well, who feel the support going away. And then the third part of it that I'll say, sorry, I don't mean to take up too much time, is also just related to audience that you actually see. Every tour that we had done previously had always sold out. So it was sort of like we knew we had the box office there. So people would say, oh, it's too much of a risk. It's like, trust us, we will sell out by the end. It's all good. Like word of mouth gets around. And then this last one, we didn't. And we had really low audiences. And the main thing that we were talking to, inviting people to come, was that they didn't want to see a sad show right now. And I think that is the truth. People don't want to sit through a show that's sad, even if it makes them feel something. They don't have that in them. They don't have that to give. That's not what they're going for their art, to do. And so I'm really thinking of ways to, not that I'm going to be doing Jersey Boys anytime soon, but to think about how do we keep our really talented people working, but doing more commercially accessible work that basically we know sells tickets. And I haven't quite cracked that yet, but it is something that we're having to think of and really reimagine our future, because what we've been doing won't continue.
SGS, we probably have time before we pull chairs in here.
I don't think there's, too much to add. Everyone said, I think, so much that resonates for me. I mean, I think certainly in Calgary, the audiences where I was just formerly, the audiences came back in huge number, but largely and almost exclusively to work that was kind of joy, celebratory based. Didn't necessarily have to be American or other, but it needed to be celebratory. And I think to Corey's point, I think the amount of people and peers too in different cities who are like, I'm just not into seeing something I'm too tired, it's too much. And so I think the world is so complex right now. Our personal feelings, our personal ecosystems are so challenged that I think there is can you give me a bit of a tonic or a balm? But I'd say the other reason why people are coming back in such huge number is that the thing that we wondered whether would happen did happen. People are sick of sitting in their living rooms watching something that looks like their workstation. And so there is a desire just to just step out. And so hopefully that wave also will last for a bit. But I think that's a purely technical swing back or wave post-COVID where people wanted to be with other people in places that weren't familiar to them for the last 3 years. Yeah.
I feel like I should also just be transparent, since I've asked everyone running an organization to tell their internal details. At FOLDA, we've also had this real challenge where I felt we were in person for 3 years, and by 2019 we'd built it up to kind of a thing that people understood, and then we went away for 2 years, and now it's taken 3 more years in person just to kind of slowly build back people. And I guess an additional challenge that we've found is often we're also trying to find our audience from not only Kingston. And previous to the pandemic, I would harass anyone. I'd be like, get on a train, it's 2 hours. I would feel not bad about making that ask to kind of anyone in the Laurentian consensus region. And now I'm I know it's a lot to ask, but if you saw you could make it for, I don't know, my ask is different. It feels like people's capacity to go on a bus and stay in a hotel for 2 nights is different.
Mm-hmm. It's self-perpetuating too, right? So if the audience is telling you they want joy and laugh and warmth and all those things, and we know that there is much more that the art form can do, and much more that it can teach and draw and discuss, but the risk then falls entirely on the company, right? So public funding has flatlined for 20 years. And so, and obviously there's, because of just natural inflation and costs and everything, the value of what we received in 2006, which is the same as we're receiving in 2025, and count ourselves lucky because we're still receiving the same amount, has reduced by how much? I'm not an economist, but by 50%.
Some.
So
the expenses have gone up.
And the expenses have gone way up. A piece of lumber is 3 times as much as it was in 2019. So the burden is entirely on the producer. And if your audience is saying, we'll only buy a ticket if you make us laugh, you put on your clown nose and you make them laugh. because that's the only way the company is going to survive. Until there's another way to bring in revenue that isn't totally related to their desire as they sit in that seat.
Right.
And that's the trick. Diversifying revenue is the trick.
Okay, I'm going to pause us there. That's interesting. I want to thank Corey, who jumped in as understudy at the last second.
Amazing.
And we really appreciate having him join us. I believe he has a dance rehearsal now, which is great. Off to do your artwork, sir. We appreciate your time. And it is also... Bye,
Thanks, Corey.
Bye, Corey.
Time to add 2 chairs and shift our format just a bit. I think... Brett and SGS, if you could just shift slightly, and we'll do the same. So we can fit in chairs here. And I will encourage our audience not to be shy about who's the first joiner, because I know a lot of people in here, and they're quite capable of joining our circle. While we're waiting, I'll ask Brett about this revenue diversification strategy.
I'm an actor. I don't know anything about finance.
not
I've been
true.
thrust into this position.
I'll tell people about your 2 desks.
Yeah, exactly.
What can we do to what are novel ways to fund this theater situation?
Well, I mean, when I joined the Thousand Ones Playhouse in 2016, my very first day I met with Canada Council and the OAC because the company was going bankrupt. And they said to me, you need to build a plan to basically get this $1 million debt off the company's books. And so it was like absolute trial by fire. Like, how am I going to do this? Like I said, I trained as an actor, and then I was a director, and then I was a part-time administrator at Buddy's. I didn't. So it was really just learning on the run. So much of it is connecting with wonderful people that are in some way affiliated with your company that feel like they could contribute more than just purchasing a ticket. So much of it is leveraging dormant assets. So, we have a production facility that is now a 20,000 square foot facility where we build all of our sets and costumes and props. And it sits dark. At that time, it was sitting dark for 8 months of the year and was being used 4 months of the year. So it's trying to figure out how else you could generate revenue out of that building, whether it's through rental, whether through contracts with other organizations to build their things. There's some great partnerships that we've established. And then it's also, we did some amazing training with Rania El-Majamar during the pandemic. And one of the things that she kept coming back to in that training was radical generosity. And just give your stuff away and see what happens. Just give it away. And I think certainly I've found in that act, so many more people have just started to put money into the organization. It seems ridiculous, but the more we just gave away all of our things to our community and to people that needed them, other theater companies, instead of like, oh, we got $70 an hour rent for the space, like who cares? $70. If you're really sweating $70 at this regional level, then there's a bigger problem. Instead, give it away and see what happens. And that's what we found. So we've made all of these partnerships with the school board, with the college, with the university, with other theater companies, and have started to slowly find earned revenue, so diversified revenue, earned revenue that isn't ticket sales, starting to buoy the organization so we're not so reliant. Because like I said, funding, there may be a tax credit will come down the pike soon, but otherwise funding is pretty much flatlined and it's not going anywhere. Maybe it'll even reduce. So I think that to me is the way to.
This is kind of boring, but I kind of want to dig in the last thing you said, because it's like, there's a rumor, and just like to name the rumor comes from the Canadian Arts Summit, which you may not attend if your organizational budget is not $3 million. But that there's some sort of tax credit that maybe will offset operating funding for large organizations. Is that what's happening? What's happening?
It's not, that's the hope.
Okay.
It's not in any way a done deal.
It's not. Yes, I understand. But I feel like this is a good use of this space to talk about like the things that are happening in those rooms that are being plotted for our sector.
I will say one thing that, not about that, about what Brett was talking about around the square footage. The biggest cultural story right now, kind of anywhere I look in my algorithms, is about the Victoria and Albert and how they managed to transform their storage space into a museum for their storage for their museum, and it's now the hottest ticket culturally in London, and it's being, you know, prized for its architectural rejuvenation of a warehouse space, and it's, you know, and that to my mind was a genius diversification of revenue streams, and making something pay for itself and probably go beyond paying for itself, and reignite interest in the actual original Victorian Albert by sort of going back through it. So, you know, talking about your additional spaces and what you give away or what you use, but I think it's thinking about what our needs are. Like, if we want more people for a sense of belonging or for relationality or whatever, what are the elements that we have that aren't our core business? Or what are the things that are costing us, rather, and what might be ways to think it through another Alice through the Looking Glass or something. But I'm quite compelled by that story right now, because I'm thinking, oh, that's actually brilliant, because it's a big expense on their balance sheet, and they've just turned it into probably something that's going to make them a lot of money. Yeah.
Somebody told me to stick to my knitting, and I said I hate knitting, so I'm just going to put it everywhere and see what happens. That's try and have an impact some corner.
Yeah, or like Minushkin, because I'm thinking about your place, like in Théâtre du Soleil in Paris, this is like years ago, and I don't know, the cartoucherie is still acting how it was, but she would do these big meals, you know, and, you know, people, the audience would walk in and watch the actors getting ready for performance. So, like, that's not monetizable per se, but it adds to the experience, and then you do pay for the meals, and then you're part of a community, and then you want to give back because you've been given, you know, more, and you don't feel terrible if you sleep during 1 hour of the 5-hour shows, as audiences did the night I was seeing it. And they still loved it, you know, so there's thinking about it not quite so sequestered. I know Jiv Parishram's been doing quite a lot of that out in Rumble in Vancouver, like trying to think about different ways to engage through community first, and then maybe eventually shows, or when you're saying like Jersey Boy, sexual misconduct, like, you know, how you do those things. But I know that's not as interesting as the tax question.
No, the tax question is not that interesting. We don't want to talk about it.
The tax question, so my understanding is that in film, there is a tax credit for technical labor, right, for production labor. And so in the theater industry, we are, you know, lobbying the federal government for the same credit in theater. So that production staff would be offset by tax credit. TBD.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah.
So just, first of all, just to invite anyone who has anything to say, there's a couple empty chairs. Something that came out last week on the topic of Canadian culture was like a new note from the CEO of the Canada Council about the value of the arts.
I saw your note.
You saw, so you know what I'm going to say.
Let me guess.
I was really disappointed by it, mostly because it's rooted in an economic benefit that the arts can provide. And I feel like we've been down that road with that Floridian logic for a while with diminished returns. And also, like, probably in this current context where it feels like kind of everybody's jockeying for our new PM's attention a bit, that an economic benefit is something that every other sector can provide. And so it kind of wastes our strategic advantage of our imaginations and inspiration a bit in what that value is. What should we say the value of Canadian culture is if it's not an economic benefit, I guess is my question. Like, what, if I'm disappointed, what did I hope was written is a question I guess I could ask myself, but I'm the moderator, so I'll post it to you.
I want to hear your answer to that, though.
Oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. I posed the question. So,
Can you repeat the question?
well, the question is a theoretical question I ask myself, which is, if I'm disappointed that the Canada Council sends us all an email saying the arts have never been more important, and then the content of that letter is these economic benefits that are brought to the arts, like, what is a more aspirational message to be hoping for from our national funder? And I guess it's one like rooted in there's a very short chunk of in that letter, which is about community and understanding each other better and like understanding ourselves better and like those reasons, like many people in this room got involved in the arts in some way and not in finance. And I worry, and perhaps it's just the nature of this government and like what's happening is everybody is reformulating the single mandate letter that every ministry got into their own format. But that's not gonna serve our sector very well. And I don't feel like we're posed, you can tell by the way I'm kind of rambling my answer, we're not posed with a clear alternative. End of thought. That's it. I've answered your question. Welcome. Welcome to the circle.
Yeah, so I have an idea or a suggestion or a question of something that was running in my
would you please introduce
mind.
yourself?
Okay, my name is Faten Mitwasi. I'm a PhD student at the Film and Media Department here in Isabel, Queen's University. And I'm an artist myself. Actually, I'm in visual arts. I do lots of installation art, which is also conceptual art. So I use different mediums in my art just to create whatever can communicate best my ideas or my vision, I would say. So while listening to you, and thank you very much for the interesting conversation, and for Corey, especially when he was complaining about the national anthem, came to my mind, like, maybe why don't we do something funny, but also creative, maybe to propose a new national anthem? Because I imagine it's something important to have a national anthem, especially when we spoke about nationalism, and I feel somehow it's good to have something that can unite the 500 plus nation, but in a creative new way, or something that would come from the people, or from the creative people, and not from, a colonizer force. So it just was an idea that I thought might be nice to brainstorm together.
Cool, thank you.
And when you say that, that helps me formulate how I would answer your question to yourself. That's what the arts, that it isn't economic. It's about what lifts us up, what makes us joy-filled, as what makes it worth staying alive, what makes it worth raising kids, what makes it worth being kind to one another, not in a moralizing sense, but really in the, I think the message should be like, the arts cost money. Let's spend tons. That's good. Yeah, it's expensive. Let's spend that money there, rather than IKEA. Like IKEA is now so dead. Like, it's actually a dead, and I've spent way too much time there. And
It's just a random example, I love it.
It's so good though, because don't you remember when IKEA was like, can you get to IKEA? Oh my God, they've got this and like all that stuff. And now it's like, it's dead. The stuff is like, it's an idea that's no longer, and it's an economic idea that's kind of no longer, of course people still use it, but it's not relevant or meaning-filled in the way that it was. And I think I don't think the market economy is doing the job right now that the economists think that it is. And I think arts and artists can, and it's worth spending a ton of our money on artists.
Christine.
Oh, hi, Christine. I'm a theater maker from Vancouver. I have been mulling on a lot of things, a lot of what Corey said, and your sort of question to yourself about what do I want that statement to be. And what I find so frustrating about this moment is that I feel like we're still stopping short at defining ourselves broadly. I'm using air quotes, Canadians. It's still stopping at being defined by opposition. So, we're not having a swift descent into full fascism yet. We're not, like that, which is very comfortable, and then it stops there. Like, I think about this, elbows up, buy Canadian. Great, so everyone's squinting at the grocery store trying to figure out where their tomatoes are from. But in BC and lots of places in Canada, most of that produce is picked by migrant labor workers who are actively barred from acquiring citizenship. There's no heat there because that's who we are. It's better just to say, well, we're not buying American because they did this thing. And I find that so frustrating because there's no actual proposal. And likewise, you know, we see in Corey's example, like, oh yes, we want CanCon, ooh, but not that CanCon. Not, because it involves actually proposing, as artists, a version of national identity that if we look at the election results from our election, like it was not a landslide. And this is me speaking, assuming how everybody in this room voted, just because you're an artist. And if you look at the demographics that keep our industry afloat, there's tension there. And it means that if you are actually going to propose a vision of national identity, even within one production, that you're not saying this is my whole company's vision of this country, it's not going to sit right with some people. And I don't know yet if we have the courage to actually do that, and that the scarcity coming out of the pandemic, with inflation, with everything going the way it is, if we're going to lose our courage. So I'm so sometimes frustrated by how we are so content to just say, well, we're not them. But then who are you saying you are?
Yeah. Yes. Who are we? I feel like that's kind of like what this, like, who are we now without that kind of connection to not being them?
And the desire for everyone to stand for the national anthem is within itself a quandary. I think that if there is anything that we are actively pursuing in this moment, is being a place where not everybody has to stand up to hear the national anthem. But can we actually hold that tension, and what does that actually practically look like? That is my big question that I keep thinking about, because it's very comfortable to say, well, we're not doing that, but what's the proposal?
It strikes me, because part of what I thought you were upset with Michelle Chawlas was that she said, oh, it's all these benefits, but she didn't say anything specific as to how. Like, there was no hard choices, there was no directives, there was nothing clear. It was just sort of like, generally, it's good, is what I sort of understood as part of your critique. And when I hear you speaking, I feel to a degree we're in this moment where the fear is to choose, because to choose means to exclude, no matter what. And so whoever gets excluded from whichever decision, value proposition or whatever that gets made, the person who makes that choice has to live with the fact that that's going to be part of the consequences. And so around this question of danger, I feel that there isn't a grand we. There can't possibly be, because all of our trajectories and the ways in which we come together are so very different. We are an agglomeration of very distinct we that makes the we, but to make a decision, it's going to screw things up. So in terms of like hiving it off to saying we're not them, that's like the first layer, like to go back to Corey's thing, like that's wave one. So then get underneath that, and then, so if we're not that, then what are each, how do we start to break it down?
Yeah, and that there's actually room for multitudes within that. Like there's, the economic argument is a great one. If you're going to see a show at the Arts Club with a ticket priced between $60 and $120, you might also be able to go for dinner and spend $100 at dinner at the restaurant down the street. And the reason that Jiv at Rumble does free food at the events is because there's a lot of people in our community who have to choose between a ticket and a meal. And so this is removing that choice. And that's two ways that people can have dinner and a show that span wildly different sort of lived experience economic brackets, but are still getting the same funding and still hopefully achieving the same thing. It's just a desire to have one answer that I think is really, really tough.
But what does bring those both together is, without seeing their books, they're both struggling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a reality too, right? Like, no matter how much it costs, like, to go out for dinner and to have the money to go to an Arts Club ticket, Arts Club is still like on the verge of like, maybe they'll fold. And same with, and like, how do we, maybe that's a commonality. I don't know, maybe like, I don't know.
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, Canadian theaters are all struggling at their own scale. And I want to pick up on what I think was underneath what you were saying, Christine, about, like, if we, like, who has the courage to make a decision and who will be included or excluded in that decision making. Something that has become really apparent to me, and I'm sure this is not exclusive of GCTC, is the question within an audience that is multitudinous in terms of its demographics of, do I belong? Is this theater a place for me? And I have heard that explicitly from people across demographic spectrums within the GCTC audience, just to flatten it into like a reductive binary, which it isn't. I've heard from older, more financially well-off and comfortable, like white, upper middle class audiences who've been allied with GCTC, who identify with this organization for a long time, saying, we know you need our money and our subscription dollars, but we don't feel represented anymore, and we're not sure that you're thinking about us. Mm-hmm. And then hearing from younger, more diverse, more queer, less economically affluent audiences saying, we don't see ourselves represented in the audience, so we don't know if we belong here. And then hearing again from the older audience members saying, we don't want to be lectured to, we don't want to be made to feel bad. The world is hard enough right now. We want to lift, we want some joy. And then hearing from the younger audience members, if there isn't an issue on stage, I don't know why I came here. And I made arrangements and I paid for transit. Like the stakes are so high. And this may not be true for every theater, but I'm sure it is representative of regional theaters who are trying to be many things to many people and hold a really large tent. And those have been really valuable things to hear explicitly, because at least where I am, we are trying to make choices, but we're trying to make choices that are that open the doors to more people rather than choosing a specific demographic. But I think, as we talked about earlier, like you can't abandon, and why would you want to abandon the people who have been, identifying with and patronizing an organization for decades? You need to bring them along in a kind of contiguous legacy as the organization changes its face to respond to the times in which we live, and as you do the work of building new relationships with new audiences, which takes a long time. So I don't know if that is an answer to your question, but in terms of the bravery, I think it's maybe just frustratingly incremental, and it's a lot of behind the scenes work.
Okay, I'm just going to ask one more question. You guys can answer it, and if anybody else wants to come in and answer this question, it's a decent one. So SGS, I think, posited something that's really got my brain turning, which is like, actually, theater's a great thing to spend money on. And the question with our government right now, they're not actually asking us like how we are going to cover our costs. Like the premiers all just met with the PM yesterday, and they all pitched their biggest projects, and then they're going to learn who's going to get all that federal money for these provincial projects. And so there must be an opportunity here right now to just be like, we need a domestic economy while all these tariffs are going on. And so just like we're building bridges, we got to build some arts. Full stop, arts, whatever. What should they pay for that they're not paying for right now? That's my question. If you were Doug Ford and you had to go pitch your project to the Prime Minister yesterday, what would you tell him they should be paying for?
Hi, I'm Sarah. I have lots of thoughts, but I will share. I just want to back up. Like before, so SGS and I sometimes think that I was like, oh, so smart. My thought right before you spoke was theater isn't about economics at all. In my opinion, I feel like it's anti-capitalism. It's way older than capitalism. theater is the closest thing, I think, like, you know, since we first looked at the stars and wondered what they were, we invented stories to explain them to ourselves, right? I can't think of anything older than ritual and story and how they work together. That's my understanding. So I think, like, my, you know, celebration of SGS's point would be to say, exactly. So if theater is not about revenue making, really, no matter how many Jersey Boys we produce, like, it costs a lot to do Jersey Boys. No, but what I love about this is like you bring them in for Jersey Boys, and then secretly they also have to watch sexual misconduct of the middle classes. They must. Like, I'm interested in that model. I want to talk more about that. But so what audacious, huge projects can we propose as a basically national theater community of nations, and just say it's all of those things? It's multitudinous, it's complex, it's nuanced. And I'm thinking back to, like, looking at the government's own versions of this, like the Canada 150 grants. Those brought huge projects to fruition, multi-year, multinational projects, multi-company projects. And, you know, like, what could we literally in this room set out as, you know, almost like, the context, like, let's codify this canon. What is the canon for right now? Is that our project? Because, you know, that was the question of Can Lit for decades, you know? There was no Can Lit. Well, yes, it is. It's not American. It's not Canadian. It's not British. This is the same question. But, okay, maybe we know who we are, actually. Like, I think that's the most audacious thing we could say. It's no longer like, who are we as Canadian artists, but, like, actually, we're Canadian artists. This is what that means. It's all of these things. And what are the ways that we could, I guess, like, audaciously challenge other Canadian artists to maybe work together, seize this moment, work together, build something huge that, that is really us. So I have no details on how to execute this.
I feel like, so one thing that, like, as just a theater maker in this country that runs a company, it's great to get these big blocks of money and cover the Isabel and Pink tool and go like, wow, we did this, like, huge, amazing project, but it's not sustainable for the workforce, which is a huge part of what I do, right? There's 150 people, 150 artists from across this country. They get paid by the main stage season that we run each year, and they all take that money and cobble together a life out of that money. These big kind of project, big amounts of money, unless they become sustainable, they really are kind of meaningless to the workforce. They have these, you know, here's $50,000, make your project, and then next year you have zero income because it was only really a one-shot deal.
No, we need salaries.
Yeah.
Well, that was my point.
National salaries.
Yes.
Tracy speaking.
Great.
I'll start with my last point, which is a basic income, so then you have audiences, people who have enough money to attend. You have people who have enough money to make a career in whatever field they would choose if they knew that they had a basic income. And then that segues back to my second point, which was, you know, laboratory style creation. If actors could be actors full time. Now, I think because I'm an actor that way, but I'm sure all of the other, if there were productions ongoing, you know, but laboratory style creation, if you could pay actors to train, to, you know, increase their skills, that would be a huge shift in what kind of work we're seeing. And then the first idea was just education, you know, arts in schools. Oh my God. What has happened? I grew up and there was a clown that came to my class, you know, and we had a drama class every day and I had a triple credit arts high school education, which is now a double credit, which is under threat of being cut, you know, like, so you need people who have training to appreciate what they're seeing. You know, our mirror neurons work best when we can imagine doing the thing that we're seeing. So it needs to be something that we learn an appreciation for young and can grow and appreciate what we're seeing on stage. So I think those are the 3 ways that I would spend the money. Although there's lots.
Yeah, thank you.
Love it.
Yeah.
I just have 2 thoughts. I don't have, and I feel like these were such beautiful ideas.
Laura, will you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. I'm Laura Levin. Hi. So I don't have an answer to your question, but I just think it's also worthwhile noting the paradox of saying that theater has nothing to do with economics while we're talking about people making a living from theater. And think that it's a Marxist approach to this would not be to say that theater has nothing to do with economics, but rather and I think that's I think saying that is different than what you're saying, which is that theater's value cannot simply be understood in terms of its contribution to the economy, right? So that it's perhaps more useful for us to understand what theater does within an economy, what it makes possible in terms of the way that people are able to live. So this is to your point, Tracy, when you say a basic income is something that we should be talking about, that's directly contradicting this idea that like theater has nothing to do with economics and is not part of that we should understand theater as being separate from the market. So that's one point. The other thing I just sort of pose is this question of like that, and maybe this is an answer to your question of what we should be doing right now is like, is this the moment where we have to passionately be saying we and to say we are not them? And what does that mean for all of our colleagues in the States who did not vote for Trump, right? Our collaborators, and many of us are doing work that is international, that is hemispheric. They have all lost their arts grants. They have all lost their humanities grants. They're desperate to be able to keep their companies going. One of the dangers and the limits of taking this moment to just invest in understanding who we are and what Canadian culture is the kind of inward-facing look that then doesn't allow us to see other people who are suffering, not only in the States, but in other parts of the world. So I guess my answer then to your question would be like, how can we also take this moment? How can the government also, in terms of what it's funding, enable us to be looking outwards and to be thinking about how we can be collaborating in order to end various kinds of movements that are happening internationally? Fascism, for example, which doesn't respect borders, right? So
Clearly.
those are just two thoughts.
Thank you.
That's beautiful.
Any thoughts?
Naomi? Yeah, a bunch. I mean, I think the UBI, the Universal Basic Income is the answer to so many things, and that's what I'd ask Doug for, to ask Mark Carney for. I think Mark Carney might actually be somebody in leadership, and I'm not a liberal, but like, who might respond to that kind of idea. Because I think in terms of, the ability to go to the theater, to pay for a ticket, to have a job, like, I know so many artists for whom the best years of their working lives was underserved, who made a living for the first time that they could count on. There was not a gig economy living. It was like, I'm going to get paid the same amount every month. And it was transformative in terms of the work that they were able to do, the mental and physical health that they were able to enjoy, and therefore the stories that they were able to tell. And I think in terms of, then the question of nationalism is like, I'm very old GCTC. Like I was
Gladstone,
like I was born into I was alive before it started, but like I'm part of the founding families of GCTC, and it came out of a time where it was so important to tell Canadian stories, and there's never been GCTC's logo's never had a maple leaf on it, and it went to GCTC because it was actually a joke, right? Like, what are we going to call the Great Canadian Theatre Company? What are we going to call it? Are we going to call it this, or are we going to call it that? This conversation happened in my parents' dining room, and so it was a joke, and then it was like the joke, one of those jokes you say too many times, and then it becomes the thing. So it's like, okay, we'll call it Great Canadian Theatre Company, and at the time it was just, and it was affiliated with the National Party, which is a unfortunate name that Robin Matthews, who's an English prophet, Carleton at the time, who wrote about nationalism and the importance of telling stories about ourselves. The words nationalism and other, political movements gets conflated in a way that I don't think was the intention then. And I think it's about, I also thought it really struck me today when the word nation, we talk about First Nations, and that's a totally respected thing. There are all these nations that existed here on this land before the Europeans arrived,
and our, my ancestors certainly, and like that use of the word nation is not derogatory, but then sometimes now when we talk about nation, it becomes derogatory. And why not like embrace distinction, like we embrace the difference between my family and your traditions, and what you have for dinner on Sundays and what we have for dinner, like all of those things that make us interesting to visit other people's homes is a good thing about the distinction between nations, but they kind of, and looking after your family first, which is sort of what GCTC felt like at the time. It was like nobody was telling our own stories. And then, so now, sorry, like I'm going to be overwhelmed. I think, so I don't discard the notion of nationalism. I just think it's a very tricky, the word itself might not be the right word. Mm-hmm. The idea can be an okay idea, and it can also be like it's nation to nation is considered a good thing, relations. We are in relation to people, families, cities, nations, whatever. And just really briefly about the anthem, which I never stand for, and I find makes me deeply uncomfortable. But watching the hockey games, when they stand as a group and sing, and yes, or probably tonight in Edmonton, I think it's, or where, that game, that is so exciting to me because it's people who, and not to make grand generalizations about sports fans, but I think we have a lot to learn from sports fans. And I think there's the question to government is, why don't you consider us as useful to you as sports are?
More body checks.
But is also that all of those people have decided not to be against their friends, the Americans, but against this kind of government that has come into power and that is so not how we want to live. And that's what I feel like the national anthem is saying now. It's just saying, whoa, that is not for us, for me. That is, and for the first time I will actually stand up in public and say so. I may not go to a rally, I may not go to the streets yet, but I will for the first time in my life sing this song. I don't know.
So the anthem is like a anti-fascist gateway drug?
Gateway, maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Jessie.
Hi, I'm Jessie. It's so exciting when that happens at the hockey game, right? And suddenly all these people who have very little opportunities to have community, to connect with each other, to feel a bond larger than their daily lives, have something happening, and it's a palpable physical feeling. It's what we want in the theater. But the idea of what I can imagine at Stratford, and I can feel myself. Someone said shivering inside, or kind of like, ugh. Because there's an enforcement there. There's this kind of idea of what I'm assuming. And I wonder if anybody here knows the rest of the verses of the national anthem. Does anybody even know that there's 3 more verses? The second one is about our land, the color of the trees, the different kinds of trees across the country, the rivers and the waters. I can't remember the third one. And the last one ends that we're standing ready for better days. We're right, there's a whole other layer to it that we never get. We don't know. Mm-hmm. My grandmother knew this, and so I learned it. And she was kind of before her time, and she would talk about the First Nation rights when people around her weren't talking about it in the 50s in Canada. And so we got that too. And I just we need these rituals. We need these gatherings. I should have said, hi, I'm Jessie, and I'm working on a sad play. Oh, yeah. And we talk a lot, do people even want to come see a sad play? And there's a line in our show that says, well, what I'm talking about might be really painful, but it's important. It's like tearing off a Band-Aid or a memory. And if we don't do these things, if we worry too much, the consequence of choice of am I keeping people's jobs? That's so important. But what are you doing? What are you making? Why are you sharing it? And is cobbling together a living, which I did before CERB. I'm one of those people that had their life changed by it in so many ways. Why are we doing it? Like, if so many of my friends work for regional companies and they barely make it and they don't get to do the work that they want to do, and they're constantly going from gig to gig. I have a really crap office job now, right? But I have benefits. It's amazing. And I can be more selective about how I work. My ideals are actually able to be things that I can stand up to. And the people that I work with, we get to take time to build a way to support each other in a way that I never could before. So I wonder why sometimes we're fighting for things that came out of a really different time, with a lot of like government money that came from celebrations, and with grant systems that don't work anymore. And I don't want to say stop doing what you're doing by any means, but why are you fighting so hard when maybe there's other ways we can do it, that we can create spaces for people to come together in, to feel that feeling of being at a sports game, and maybe having a little bit more time between them and not having to gig it. Like, is that the worst thing in the world? Are we so stuck in this like end-to-end kind of work? I don't know. This is what I wonder.
I just really appreciate you didn't say the term Jersey boys.
We have time to hear from our last two guests around the circle. So we'll start with you.
Thank you for this conversation.
Two things, just the point, which I think is very important, is that GCTC's first show was called Sandinista.
No, it's not the first.
It wasn't the first, it was the second. It was very early on.
Speaking now is Lib Spry.
What? Well, I'm Lib Spry. But I think it's important because I just saw Mahabharata last week. That was a show which was 90% Canadian, right? And I think, and Sandinista was as well, but it was talking about what was happening in Nicaragua then. And I think that's a way of opening up to other places, is our take on what that does to us, what that means to us. And I think that's very important, and we need to remember that when we say Canadian, what do we mean? The other thing I want to say is that I think that we need to start saying, I think most of the really, really stunning shows I've seen recently all had money from the National Arts Creation Fund. They had time. They didn't put a show together in 2.5 weeks or 1 week. I mean, I remember an actor friend telling me in Montreal that they had 10 days from first rehearsal to opening night. He played the lead. He had 75% of the text. He said he got up at 5 every morning to learn his lines, rehearsal, learning my lines, 4 hours sleep, learning my lines. And that happens. I mean, that's an extreme version. And then we have a run for 2 weeks. If we're really lucky, it's 4. And just as you're really beginning to get into that show, it's over. And you probably never get to approach it again. So you see something like Mahabharata, which is an extraordinary, vast, exciting piece of theater. They've been working on it for 10 years. I think we need to start demanding that we reorganize how the hell we work, whether it's in your kind of theater or whatever, so that we have what I call marination. And a couple of times I've been working with people who are Union des Artistes as well as Equity, and they have a completely different setup, where they can work for a week and then have a break, and it's very clear how much you get paid for the last, I think, 2 weeks of rehearsal and the run. but you can actually work on the show as part of the process over time. And that is my big demand at this point in my life.
That's a lot to follow. I'm wondering if I shouldn't. My name's Ariane. I'm coming from a background in contemporary dance. So I'm a producer in contemporary dance. So my context is a little bit different, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. And the thing that has continued to come back, like the word that keeps coming back in my mind throughout this entire conversation, even as we were talking about the economy, is comfort. So like the economy of building comfortable spaces. And I've been thinking about how comfortable it is for all of us. And I produced my own conference that's happening next week, and that's very similar to FOLDA in so many ways, where it's very comfortable for the artists and the producers that come into our space to be comfortable. It's really comfortable to have these conversations and to talk about, like, what does everyone else want? How do we build these communities? And I'm also thinking about the economy itself, and the Canadian and the North American government is built on money, and our technologies are built in how we make ourselves more and more comfortable. And so I'm thinking about this like balance that we have to find in these beautiful traditions of the old, but like the context in which we find ourselves now, where people of all ages and all groups want to be comfortable, especially after the pandemic. And so some of that is bringing them back to joy. And then there's this, how do we make people more comfortable in these environments where they can participate in something sad or something, like how can we make them more comfortable to even talk about that? Or how can we build spaces that help them unpack the ways in which they're feeling, or help them understand where to go next?
That's beautiful. I'm not gonna make this conversation go any further. I think that's a nice place to end. I want to thank everyone for participating in this first conversation. It's great to get started this way. We have 3 more that are happening tomorrow, but most importantly, there is a show tonight at the Broom Factory. So between 7 and 8, we're having food and warming up the space. Thank you, Tracy. And then tomorrow we're back here for our first conversation at 10. Where we're going to talk kind of more about the American context. So that will be great. And Adrian, did I forget to say anything?
I don't think so, but maybe.
Yes, it's possible. We'll let you know if I did. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Laurie Stevens, Odyssey Theatre.
When would that have been?
It was last year.